The alarm bells screamed through Detention Block 7 of the Galactic Enforcement Station, but Senior Guard Captain Vexhara barely lifted one of her 4 eyelids. The Zephyrian had been working this posting for 12 cycles, and false alarms were more common than actual escapes. Her reptilian hide shifted against the monitoring chair as she reached for the silence button with one of her 6 arms. Probably another malfunction in the atmospheric recyclers, she muttered to herself, her translator converting the clicking sounds into standard galactic. The other guards around the central monitoring station didn't even look up from their data tablets and entertainment feeds. Guard Technician Moltwing, a young crystalline whose body segments gleamed under the artificial lighting, finally spoke up from his position at the sensor array. Captain, the disturbance readings are coming from Holding Cell Complex C. Vexhara's secondary arms paused over her morning nutrition supplement. Complex C housed the most dangerous criminals in this sector of the galaxy. Mass murderers, or criminals, those who had committed crimes against entire species. It also housed the newest additions to their collection. 3 weeks ago, enforcement vessels had intercepted a small ship carrying what appeared to be a family unit of an unknown species. The adults were unconscious, but the younglings were awake and had immediately begun what could only be described as the most terrifying sounds any of the arresting officers had ever heard. Deep, rumbling vocalizations that seemed to vibrate through hull plating and into the bones of anyone nearby. The senior arresting officer had filed a report describing the sounds as primitive hunting calls and recommended maximum security containment. The species called themselves humans, according to the translation matrix, though their designation in the enforcement database was simply unknown aggressive bipeds. The adults remained in medical isolation after exposure to a sedative that had kept them unconscious for days beyond normal parameters. The 3 younglings, however, had proven resistant to all but the strongest containment measures. What type of disturbance? Vexhara asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Audio anomalies, Captain. The same ones we've been detecting every morning for the past 18 days. The other guards finally looked up from their stations. Guard Prex Toll, whose moth-like antennae twitched nervously, spoke in his high-pitched whistle. It's those human cubs again, isn't it? Making their morning sounds. Vexhara activated the audio feed from Complex C and immediately regretted it. The sound that filled the monitoring station was unlike anything in the known galaxy. Deep, powerful, and somehow melodic, it seemed to come from multiple sources but harmonized in a way that suggested intelligence and coordination. The youngest guards visibly trembled, their various physiologies responding to what their evolutionary instincts interpreted as the hunting calls of apex predators. "Turn it down," whispered Guard Yilmoth, her gaseous form flickering with stress patterns. "Every time I hear those sounds, I have nightmares about being hunted." But Vexhara was listening more carefully now. After 3 weeks of these morning disturbances, she was beginning to notice patterns. The sounds weren't random vocalizations. They had rhythm, structure, and what seemed like specific start and stop points. More importantly, they seemed to be directed at something or someone. Moltwing, bring up the visual feed from cell block C7 through C9. The main display showed 3 separate holding cells, each containing a single human youngling. The cells were designed to hold the most dangerous criminals in the galaxy, with force field barriers, atmospheric controls, and monitoring systems that tracked everything from brain wave patterns to digestive functions. In cell C7, the largest of the younglings stood facing the barrier. The enforcement files indicated this one was approximately 12 standard years old, though human development was still largely unknown to galactic science. The youngling's mouth was open, and the powerful vocalizations were clearly coming from this individual. Cell C8 held a slightly smaller human, estimated at 9 standard years, who was also vocalizing but in a different pitch and rhythm. The sounds combined with those from C7 in a way that created harmonics that resonated through the station structure. Cell C9 contained the smallest, perhaps 6 standard years old, who was not vocalizing but was moving rhythmically, as if responding to the sounds from the other cells. "They're communicating," Vexhara realized aloud. "Those aren't hunting calls or threat displays. They're talking to each other." Guard Prextol's antennae drooped. But, Captain, the sounds are so frightening. Surely they must be some form of aggressive display. Think about it, Vexhara said, her mind working through the implications. We separated them into individual maximum security cells specifically because we assumed they were too dangerous to house together. But they found a way to maintain contact anyway. She manipulated the controls to focus on the audio patterns. The translation matrix had been running analysis on the sounds for weeks, but had failed to identify them as language. Now, listening with fresh attention, Vexhara could hear the complexity. There were repeated phrases, responses, and counter-responses, and what seemed like emotional variations. Moltwing, run a behavioral analysis on the patterns. I want to know if this matches any known communication protocols. As the technician worked, Vexhara continued watching the visual feeds. The younglings maintained their vocalizations for exactly 17 standard minutes, the same duration they had used every morning since their arrival. When they finished, each youngling moved to what appeared to be predetermined positions within their cells and began what could only be described as systematic physical exercise. The largest human performed rapid movements that suggested combat training, precise strikes, defensive postures, and coordinated sequences that spoke of advanced martial development despite the youngling's apparent age. The middle youngling engaged in similar activities but with variations that suggested a different fighting style or training methodology. Even the smallest human performed movements that were clearly martial in nature, though adapted to smaller size and different physical capabilities. Captain, Moltwing called out, his crystalline form flickering with excitement. The behavioral analysis is complete. The vocalizations match 17 different galactic communication patterns, but most closely resemble what we classify as familial bonding calls. Familial bonding? Guard Yilmoth's gaseous form brightened with confusion. Those terrifying sounds are how they bond with family members? Vexhara felt a cold realization settling into her consciousness. For 3 weeks, they had been interpreting the morning vocalizations of these human younglings as threats or hunting calls. But, if the analysis was correct, these were children calling out to their siblings. The powerful, frightening sounds that had been keeping the guard staff on edge every morning were simply the human equivalent of saying, "Good morning," to family members. She pulled up the original arrest reports and began reading more carefully. The humans had been traveling in what enforcement had classified as a suspicious vessel, but, reviewing the specifics, it appeared to be a family transport. No weapons had been found, no contraband, no evidence of criminal activity. The adults had been classified as potential threats, primarily because they belonged to an unknown species and had attempted to resist arrest when enforcement officers approached their children. Moltwing, what's the status on the adult humans? Still in medical isolation, Captain. The sedatives affected their neurological systems more severely than predicted. Medical estimates suggest they might not regain consciousness for another several days. Vexhara looked back at the display showing the 3 younglings, who had now moved on to what appeared to be educational activities. The largest was manipulating something in the cell that looked like mathematical equations, though in a format not recognized by galactic databases. The middle youngling appeared to be creating artistic expressions using available materials. The smallest was engaged in what looked like physical construction with the basic furnishings provided in the cell. These weren't dangerous criminals or primitive savages. They were children whose parents were unconscious in medical isolation, trying to maintain contact with their siblings and structure to their days while imprisoned in maximum security facilities designed for the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. Captain, Guard Prextol spoke hesitantly. If these are just younglings trying to communicate with their siblings, should we be treating them as maximum security prisoners? Before Vexhara could answer, alarms began sounding again, but these were different. Emergency medical alerts from the isolation wing where the adult humans were being held. Medical emergency in Isolation Bay 5, came the announcement through the station's communication system. All available medical personnel report immediately. Vexhara activated her communication link to the medical bay. This is Detention Captain Vexhara. What's the status of the human adults? Captain, they're regaining consciousness, and their vital signs are spiking beyond normal parameters. We're reading neurological activity that suggests extreme stress, possibly panic responses. Looking back at the display showing the human younglings, Vexhara saw something that made her understand the full scope of their mistake. All three younglings had stopped their activities and were facing toward the direction of the medical bay, though it was located several levels away and completely outside their possible sensory range. They stood motionless, as if listening for something. Moltwing, are we picking up any unusual sensor readings from the youngling cells? Negative, Captain. But there's something strange. The ambient sound levels throughout this entire section have changed. It's as if everything has gotten quieter. That's when Vexhara realized what was happening. The human younglings somehow knew their parents were waking up. Whether through senses not understood by galactic science or some form of familial connection that transcended physical barriers, they were aware of their parents' condition. The medical alerts continued, and Vexhara could hear the stress in the medical officer's voice over the communication system. Captain, the adult humans are becoming increasingly agitated. Heart rates are approaching dangerous levels, and they're vocalizing in ways that are causing resonance problems in the medical equipment. Are they calling for their younglings? Unknown, Captain, but the vocalizations are powerful, and they seem to be directed toward this detention block. Vexhara made a decision that would have seemed impossible an hour earlier. Moltwing, I'm authorizing a re-evaluation of the human detention status. Begin procedures to move them from maximum security to family housing units. Captain, Guard Prextol's antennae quivered with uncertainty. Are you certain that's advisable? Those morning vocalizations that have been terrifying us for 3 weeks? They're children saying good morning to their siblings. Children who have been separated from their unconscious parents and locked in cells designed for genocidal war criminals. Children who have maintained their family bonds and daily routines despite being treated as the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. She paused, looking at the display where the 3 human younglings remained motionless, clearly aware that something significant was happening with their parents despite having no possible way of knowing. If we've been this wrong about their morning communications, we need to consider what else we might have misunderstood about this species. Dr. Kelmera had seen many species recover from sedation during her 40-year career in xenobiology, but nothing had prepared her for the awakening of the human adults. The 2 beings designated as Human Alpha and Human Beta in the medical files were displaying physiological responses that defied every standard recovery protocol in galactic medicine. Their cardiovascular systems are operating at levels that should be fatal, she reported to Captain Vexhara through the communication link, her 6-fingered hands dancing across the medical monitoring equipment. But they show no signs of distress from the increased activity. It's as if their bodies are designed to function at these elevated states. Human Alpha, identified in their translation records as David, was the larger of the 2 adults. His muscle structure was unlike anything in the galactic database, with fiber density that suggested capabilities far beyond normal galactic species parameters. Human Beta, Sarah, showed similar physiological anomalies, but with additional complexities that the medical scanners were still analyzing. Doctor, what's causing their agitation levels? Captain Vexhara's voice carried new concern. In the hour since the humans had begun regaining consciousness, the entire detention facility had been dealing with problems they'd never encountered. They're vocalizing constantly, Captain, but it's not random. The translation matrix is identifying repeated patterns that seem to be names. Specifically, what appear to be the designation codes for the 3 younglings in detention. Dr. Kelmera manipulated the display to show the vocal analysis. The sounds the human adults were making carried far more complex